Sheriff Michael Raines is here from Eaton County, and the sheriff stood up for constitutional government and being a member of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. He works with Sheriff Mack and I think also Sheriff Darley.
Sheriff Darley
from Berry County. And the sheriff stands up for these principles even when they're not politically convenient. And he might tell us a story about that as he discusses his career. He's done a lot of training. I've looked at his bio. It's very impressive, working with the FBI, the National Sheriff's Association, Secret Service, Michigan State, their CSI training, the Lansing Community College, U.S. Transportation and Safety Administration. I mean, there's quite a bit that he's done here. He's won quite a few professional service awards. He has some very dramatic crime-stopping work, capturing dangerous armed robbers, Redbeard's accomplice in Delta Township, which led to the arrest of this Redbeard person. He's also been involved in capturing and arresting an armed suspect who had just robbed a bank in Mulliken, Michigan, which I wasn't familiar with, and a lot of work in cemetery vandalism cases and all sorts of things, protecting the peace and people's property and safety. So that's really a great thing. As I say, he has had 37 years in law enforcement. He's constitutionally oriented. So it's going to be a really wonderful presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, Sheriff Mike Raines from Eaton County.
When Benjamin Franklin exited the Constitutional Convention, he was asked by a woman, "Sir, what have you given us?" His immediate response was, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it." Yet most Americans today have been persuaded that our nation's governmental system is a democracy and not a republic. The difference between these two is essential in understanding Americanism and the American system. Before we discuss political systems, however, it's helpful to address the confusion that has been spread about the political spectrum. Many have been led to believe that the political spectrum places groups such as communists on the far left, fascists or dictators on the far right, and political moderates or centrists in the middle. However, a more accurate political spectrum will show government having zero power on the far right to having 100% power on the far left. At the extreme right, there is no government. The extreme left features total government under such labels as communism, socialism, Nazism, fascism, princes, potentates, dictators, kings, any form of total government. Those who claim that Nazis and fascists are right-wing never define their terms. This amounts to spreading confusion. Toward the middle of the political spectrum can be found the type of government limited to its proper role of protecting the rights of the people. That's where the Constitution of the United States is. Those who advocate such a form of government are really constitutional moderates. So let's analyze the basic forms of government. They are monarchy or dictatorship ruled by one, oligarchy ruled by a few, democracy ruled by a majority, republic ruled by law, and anarchy, which is ruled by no one. In discussing these five, we'll see that they can be narrowed down to even fewer. Looking first at monarchy or dictatorship, this form of government doesn't really exist in the practical sense. It's always a group that puts one of its members up front. A king has his council of nobles or earls, and every dictator has his bureaucrats or commissars, the men behind the scenes. This isn't ruled by one, even though one person may be the visible leader. It's ruled by a group. So let's eliminate monarchy, dictatorship, because it never truly exists. Oligarchy, which is ruled by a group, is the most common form of government in all history. And it is the most common form of government today. Most of the nations of the world are ruled by a powerful few, and therefore oligarchy remains. At the other end, we find anarchy, which means without government. Some people have looked over history and found that many of its worst crimes were committed by governments. So they decided that having no government might be a good idea. But this is a mistake, because as the ancient Greeks stated, without law there can be no freedom. Our founding fathers agreed and held that some amount of government is a necessary force in any civilized, orderly society. In a state of anarchy, however, everyone has to guard life, liberty, and property, and the lives of family members. Everyone must be armed, and movement is severely restricted because one's property has to be protected at all times. Civilized people have always hired someone to do the guarding, a sheriff, a police force, or some branch of government. Once law enforcement was in place, the people were freer. They could leave their property, work in the fields, and so on. In short, the proper amount of government makes everyone freer. There are some who advocate anarchy, however, not because they want no government, but because they don't like what they have. They use anarchy as a tool for revolutionary change. The condition of anarchy is very much like a vacuum where something rushes in to fill it. These calculating anarchists work to break down the existing government with rioting, killing, looting, and terrorism. Tragically, the people living in such chaos often go to those best able to put an end to it and beg them to take over and restore order. And who is best able to put an end to the chaos? The very people who started it. The anarchists who created the problem then create a government run by them, an oligarchy, where they have total power. This is exactly what happened in Russia that led to Lenin taking total power, and in Germany where Hitler's brown shirts created the chaos that brought him to power. But anarchy isn't a stable form of government. It's a quick transition from something that exists to something desired by the power-hungry. It's a temporary condition, and because it isn't permanent, we eliminate it as well. The word democracy comes from two Greek words, demos, meaning people, and kratein, meaning to rule. Democracy, therefore, means the rule of the people, majority rule. This, of course, sounds good, but suppose the majority decides to take away one's home, or business, or children. Obviously, there has to be a limit. The flaw in democracy is that the majority isn't restrained. If more than half the people can be persuaded to want something in a democracy, they rule. What about republic? Well, that comes from the Latin, res meaning thing, and publica meaning public. It means the public thing, the law. A true republic is one where the government is limited by law, leaving the people alone. America's founders had a clean slate to write on. They could have set up an oligarchy. In fact, there were some who wanted George Washington to be their king. But the Founding Fathers knew history, and they chose to give us the rule of law in a republic, not the rule of a majority in a democracy. Why? Let's demonstrate the difference in the setting of the Old West. Consider a lynch mob in a democracy. 35 horseback riders chase one lone gunman. They catch him, and they vote 35-1 to hang him. Democracy has triumphed, and there's one less gunman to contend with. Now consider the same scenario in a republic. The 35 horseback riders catch the gunman and vote 35-1 to hang him, but the sheriff arrives, and he says, "You can't kill him. He's got his right to a fair trial." So they take the gunman back to town. A jury of his peers is selected, and they hear the evidence and the defense, and they decide if he shall hang. Does the jury even decide by majority rule? No, it has to be unanimous, or he goes free. The rights of the gunman aren't subject to majority rule, but to the law. This is the essence of a republic. Many Americans would be surprised to learn that the word democracy does not appear in the Declaration of Independence or the U.S. Constitution, nor does it appear in any of the constitutions of the 50 states. The founders did everything they could to keep us from having a democracy. James Madison, rightly known as the father of the Constitution, wrote in essay number 10 of the Federalist Papers, "Democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths." Alexander Hamilton agreed, and he stated, "We are a republican government. Real liberty is never found in despotism or in the extremes of democracy." Samuel Adams, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, stated, "Democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself." The founders had good reason to look upon democracy with contempt, because they knew that the democracies in the early Greek city-states produced some of the wildest excesses of government imaginable. In every case, they ended up with mob rule, then anarchy, and finally tyranny under an oligarchy. During that period in Greece, there was a man named Solon, who urged creation of a fixed body of law not subject to majority whims. But where the Greeks never adopted Solon's wise counsel, the Romans did. Based on what they knew of Solon's laws, they created the 12 tables of the Roman law and in effect built a republic that limited government power and left the people alone. Since government was limited, the people were free to produce, with the understanding that they could keep the fruits of their labor. In time, Rome became wealthy and the envy of the world. In the midst of plenty, however, the Roman people forgot what freedom entailed. They forgot that the essence of freedom is the proper limitation of government. When government power grows, people freedom recedes. Once the Romans dropped their guard, power-seeking politicians began to exceed the powers granted them in the Roman Constitution. Some learned that they could elect politicians who would use government power to take property from some and give it to others. Agriculture subsidies were introduced, followed by housing and welfare programs. Inevitably, taxes rose and controls over the private sector were imposed. Soon, a number of Rome's producers could no longer make ends meet, and they went on the dole. Productivity declined, shortages developed, and mobs began roaming the streets, demanding bread and circuses from the government. Many were induced to trade freedom for security. Eventually, the whole system came crashing down. They went from a republic to a democracy and ended up with an oligarchy under a progression of the Caesars. Thus, democracy itself is not a stable form of government. Instead, it is the gradual transition from limited government to the unlimited rule of an oligarchy. Knowing this, we as Americans are ultimately left with only two choices. We can keep our republic, as Franklin put it, or we will inevitably end up with an oligarchy, a tyranny of the elite.
Hey! Is this my turn? You want me to sing now? Okay.
And again, forgive me, you know, I don't have a teleprompter and I'm not a professional speaker, so I got to go by this and I got to shuffle things around, and I'm not used to holding a microphone. But what that does is it kind of explains, it kind of sets up it sets it up for me to give this talk, because the sheriff, the founders, I believe the founder's role of the sheriff was to be a check and balance and for the republic, and try to keep us in a republic and not a pure democracy. So, and the reason I brought this up is because I don't know if you know what's being taught in the schools today. It's another presentation that I can talk about, and my wife and I can talk about, but in the schools today, the kids are not being taught that we have a republic. They're being taught that we have a democracy. And what's the word, Lori? A something democracy? It's the same thing as a republic. Well, anyway, it's a bunch of... So I wanted to bring that up because our kids are not being taught what a real republic is in the Constitution. Forgive me again, but I wanted to tell you a little a story. Now, it wasn't in the news, and you'll find out later why. But 4 boys were fishing. As their boat rounded the point in the lake, they saw a man thrashing the water without hesitation. They jumped in and saved the man. It was not until they pulled him into the boat noticed that the man they saved was President Barack Obama, who had slipped away from Secret Service to go for a swim. When President Obama caught his breath, he thanked the boys and offered them anything they wanted in return for saving his life. First boy thought about it for a minute and said, "I'd like to be a presidential appointee, or get a presidential appointment to West Point so I can serve my country." He said, "Done." The next boy said, I always wanted to be a pilot, and I'd like to attend the Air Force Academy. So consider it done. The third boy chose the Naval Academy. The president turned to the fourth boy, who was still thinking. Finally, the boy said, Mr. President, I'd like to have a burial with honors at Arlington National Cemetery. President Obama was shocked and asked the boy why he would make such a request at such a young age. The boy replied, because when my dad finds out I saved you, he's going to kill me. Okay. Next slide. What I'm going to talk about today are the founders' intent for America, is the way I see it, of constitutional sheriffs, liberty and freedom reliance, and what we can do to help to protect and preserve our liberties for future generations. Again, forgive me here. Our founders, through the Declaration of Independence, Constitution of our Bill of Rights, made their intent clear that they wanted all our government officials, including sheriffs, to honor and follow their oath of office, to realize that every American citizen has God-given, unalienable rights, and to follow the Constitution with discretionary policing, which I'll explain later, and to serve and to protect. I took an oath of office, and my belief that whenever you raise your right hand to take an oath of office, you should have the Constitution with that Bible. And my oath was, I do solemnly swear to support the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of this state, and I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of sheriff according to the best of my abilities. So help me God. In fact, every sheriff in America is sworn to live by similar oaths to protect the rights of Americans. As sheriffs or constitutional police officers, we must all understand and honor the fact that government's number one purpose is to defend and protect the God-given rights of its citizens laid out in our Constitution and in our Bill of Rights. The Constitution limits government's authority and power, ensuring proper checks and balances. Every constitutional sheriff's purpose is to enforce the rights of the people, honoring the intent of our founders. These principles must be placed above politics without exception. We've all heard of the preamble of the Constitution. Did you know that there's a preamble to the Bill of Rights? I didn't until just months ago. And again, the preamble of the Bill of Rights was written to ensure the government was prevented from misconstruction or abuse of its powers. And again, how many people even know that there's a preamble to that? All you hear is that there are the laws and stuff that they're making to take away those rights or to give it to state or federal government. Our founders' intent was clear, and as a constitutional sheriff, it was my duty to honor that part of my oath. Brought a few copies of the Bill of Rights with me. Feel free to take them. They're up there somewhere. Okay. And so we got some handouts up here. In my 37 years of law enforcement, taught me that there are basically two basic philosophies of policing. And one of them I didn't like. And that was the one I was always getting in trouble for by not writing enough tickets. I was constantly getting close to being written up for not writing enough tickets. If somebody everybody knows here too, you've probably been driving, seen somebody driving around doing something stupid, say, where's the police officer when we need him? They need to write a ticket. There are people that need tickets. But people do not need tickets just because the government needs a revenue source. And that's been my belief in all my years of policing. And what I'd like to do now is do a traffic stop. Who wants to get stopped by me?
By you.
Come on up. Come on up.
First, do you carry it? Share talk loudly, you may not need the mic.
I probably don't need my. Have a seat in your car, sir. Let me make it look official. Let's look official. Got to play the part, right? Okay, typical traffic stops. What happens? You get stopped. Sir, you're 5 miles an hour over the speed limit, and I don't care. Why? I'm going to write you a ticket. And when is that usually? At the end of the month? Okay. I'm not insinuating that there's a quota, but we'll let you figure that out. But towards the end of the month, there might be more tickets being written. Again, that's the lazy administrator's way to find out if the deputies are doing anything. And again, I was always getting in trouble for that. The problem there is even if there's no quota, that you're being graded with other deputies out on the road. And we'd have Deputy Smith or Deputy Jones that out there, being the good deputies they are writing 10 or 15 tickets a month, and I'm writing one to someone that really deserved it. And so I was always graded at the lower end. So my response to that was, in the way that I believe deputies should be, is discretionary. Not being driven to write tickets, which in essence is violating somebody's rights if you're doing it for the wrong reason. And to, this is going to go on. I'll be on YouTube now. So,
With the band.
with the band. Yes, where was I? And so they're written tickets, but you got to have discretionary police officers. Non-discretionary police officers are the ones that just enforce the law no matter what it is, just to enforce the law or keep from getting fired. The person that you always have to work on is your sheriff. Your sheriff, this county is Mike Bouchard. I know Mike Bouchard very well, and I believe he's on board. But your sheriff is the one that is controlled by the people. That's why the founders had it set up to have sheriffs elected. So they are local control. Okay, a city police, a state police, they are controlled by the government. You have a city mayor or a city police chief that says, we got to get some revenue, and tells them they have to go out and write tickets. If the city chief does not do that, he or she can be fired. Same with state police or transferred to a desk job or whatever. But the thing is, the sheriff has the discretionary power, and to pass that discretionary power on to the deputies for them to use their discretion. It's not telling them not to write tickets, but use your discretion in writing tickets. And what I mean by that is the scenario I'm going to go through. You getting tired of sitting there waiting for me? It's not as bad as the police officer going back to the car and running it. You know, they're just sitting there waiting. Okay. See, normally, a person without discretion would come up there with a non-discretionary law enforcement. Towards the end of the month, I've only got 2 tickets. Everybody else has got 10 or 15. I've got to write a ticket. So I stopped you, sir, and I don't know what this is. You're driving from the passenger side. But, sir, and just pretend you give it to me, but I need your driver's license, registration, proof of insurance. Thank you. It's all valid. Everything's good there.
And permit to carry.
Yeah, well, yeah, you didn't tell me about the permit to carry. But anyway, so I'm talking to you, and sir, the reason I stopped you, you were 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. And the speed limit here is 65, you were doing 70. And I am going to go back, and I'm thinking to myself, I gotta have a ticket. And he broke the law, but being a discretionary or a non-discretionary law enforcement, my middle management or my boss is going to say, you got to get some tickets. So, sir, I got to write you a ticket for that. I'll be back. Okay? I believe his rights are being violated and justice is not being done because a discretionary police officer, discretionary sheriff, or a sheriff deputy come up and say, probably wouldn't make the traffic stop in the first place for 5 mile an hour speed limit, but if he or she did, then it's, sir, I stopped you for being 5 mile an hour over the speed limit. And I know you told me that you just lost your job 2 weeks ago, and that you're taking your daughters over to the in-laws so that they can have breakfast. So drive safely and just try to keep your speed limit down. Because I would have the discretion. I'm not being nudged or forced into writing him a ticket just because he broke the law. I'm using my discretion to decide that it would not be justifiable to write him a ticket when he just lost his job, that it's going to be about a $120 fine. I don't know what the fine is here. In my county, it's about a $120 fine just because I needed stats. So with that, that's one of my first examples of what a discretionary police officer does. And it's harder for a chief or state police to be discretionary because they are driven by the government where they get their power. The sheriff, again, gets it from the people. And if somebody went after me and said, well, you got to write, well, for instance, a judge. I had a judge in 2012 take me out to lunch twice and tell me that I had to have my people write more tickets because we were down $250,000 in tickets in the courts, and he was going to have to lay off a clerk. And I told him I was not going to be a revenuer for the county.
He wanted more in his retirement fund.
Yeah, whatever. Whatever. So with that, what I want to do is I want to give him a little token for being so good and not beating me up at the traffic stop. But what we did is last year it was a 175-year anniversary for Eaton County Sheriff's Office, and I had some coins made up on my own pocket, my own money. And what they say is, I can't really read it here. If I turn it side up, my oath. Excuse me, I got to get out of the camera here. There. My oath is to protect and defend your rights under the Constitution. Stand beside us with a partnership that holds the line and preserves all our liberties. It's an effort to work with the public to get them to work with the sheriff and understand the sheriff is there for the people. And even if it's to go against state or federal government, they stand with the people. At least they're supposed to. So here, sir. Thank you. Okay, now I gotta go back and find out where I was. Okay. When we were talking about discretionary law enforcement, what would have happened in Nazi Germany if the sheriffs, they had all sheriffs, they had a constitution like we got. And again, look at how government is trying to get rid of our constitution.
Yes.
It's very important. If they had a constitution then, and we had sheriffs that were constitutional, what would have happened if all the sheriffs says, no, the federal government's not coming in here? And some people answered, well, they'd probably all die. Well, the thing is they wouldn't necessarily die, because if it works the way the founders intended, the sheriffs would have been building up a partnership with the public, and it would have been the sheriff supporting the public against the government. Not that I'm anti-government or anything like that, but the thing is the sheriff's duty is to protect the rights of the citizens. If anybody, a criminal, a rapist, a city official, the state government, the federal government starts violating somebody's rights, it's the sheriff's duty to stand up with those citizens to protect their rights. And law enforcement has lost that. And just think about it. How would it have been if the sheriffs refused to go on with the Hitler's edicts? They probably would have had a civil war, but there probably would have been a lot of lives that would have been saved. Okay. Need another volunteer.
I'll do it.
Come on up.
Hey, Sheriff, how are we doing on time? What do you think?
I don't know. I started late, so
Yeah, we're getting close to 2 o'clock, but that's okay.
I can hurry.
No, I don't want you to hurry. I'm just, you think it's going to be another 15 or 20 minutes?
We're about a little more than halfway through, I believe.
Okay.
Everybody, I'm sure, knows what happened December 1st, 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama with Rosa Parks. She was arrested because she would not sit in the back of a bus. Okay? The law enforcement, they probably didn't even know what discretionary and non-discretionary law enforcement was back then. But what they did is, it was a city department. There wasn't even a sheriff involved that I know of. But they said, that's the law, and you must enforce that law no matter what. And again, I believe that her rights were violated. But a discretionary law enforcement, which we're trying to push all our sheriffs to be, can make that decision. When I was going through my campaign, I had my opponents saying that I could not differentiate between what laws I was going to enforce and what laws I wasn't going to. Well, I say we can, and we should. And I'll put on my hat again. Still got my badge on. So again, what happened is they went on the bus, asked her why she was not sitting in the back. She felt she didn't have to, and they arrested her. They actually booked her in for that crime of breaking that law. Okay? Now I contend if it would have been a discretionary law enforcement or a constitutional sheriff, what they would have done is approach the bus and say, Ms. Parks, you know that it's against the law here in Alabama for you to sit on the front of the bus when there's room in the back.
Yes, I
You
do.
aware?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes, I am.
Is there any reason why you were still sitting up in the front of the bus when they told you to go to the back? They called me to come and talk to you about that.
I was tired and I didn't feel like getting up.
Okay. Okay. Well, Miss Rosa, I really honor in your bravery. And if you don't mind, I am not going to enforce that law. But besides that, if you don't mind, if you allow me, I will sit here beside you and make sure you get to your destination safely, if you don't mind. And if the bus driver or anybody else tries to force you to go back to the bus, I will arrest them. Is that okay with you?
Yes.
Okay, and that's what a constitutional discretionary law enforcement should be doing, is interpreting the rights of the people as they go. And not wait until it goes to court and arrest the people. So, and again, thank you for. Again, the way we hand these out is you do a handshake. And thank you very much. Okay. Sorry, I got my automatic teleprompter here is not working well. You got a teleprompter? Oh, no, you got a coin. I thought somebody was trying to help me here. Upholding the law, because our Constitution is the law of the land. Some of the things that I've ran across and helped me understand the Constitution and the duty of the sheriff is situations that I run through. I was going to a lot of the game dinners, and there was Amish people there that were doing the setup and doing the auctioning of guns and stuff. I had some of them approach me and said, "Sheriff, you know, we can't even win a gun because we have to have photo identification when we go up and do all that. And our religion does not really allow us to have our image on anything. Matter of fact, some of them go so far as to not going into stores that have cameras." So I says, "Well, what can we do about it? What do you use for identification?" He says, "When we go into Canada, we use our Social Security exempt certificate. They're exempt from Social Security, and we use addresses and stuff like that to do our identification, to go over into Canada." And I said, "Well, that's good enough for me. So why don't you?" I had another meeting with them, and they came into my office. I says, "Tell you what we'll do. Using my discretion," said, "if you bring your identification in that you use to go to Canada and meet me face to face so I can look at you, and you want to purchase a long gun or a handgun at a gun dealer," I said, "I will issue you a permit to purchase." Not that I believe we need permit to purchases, but it's in place. So why not use something that's in place to enforce somebody's rights? And so what I did is made an agreement with the Amish that if they wanted to purchase a gun, they come in and I would give them a permit to purchase so that we could enforce their rights to be able to have ownership of a handgun or a long gun. Now again, with that, one of the bills that's being proposed out there is to take the permits to purchase away. Now, on its face, that sounds good to me, but if it's going to violate the Amish rights, because what we did in investigating this, what we did is we didn't just say, do that. I kind of went, but I had my chief deputy get hold of state police, and I got the memo right here, and it said from state police, they contacted the feds, the ATF, and the state police, they stated that religion does not play into what is required under the law, and there are no exemptions to this law for any reason.
That's nuts.
So that's what gave me the motivation to say I will circumvent this and again, that goes back to other issues where we want the laws being controlled locally through the sheriffs, and we do not need to give any of that over to state police or the federal government. So any laws or bills that do that, you have to look at very closely to make sure that we are not, because something's candy-coated, giving up our rights because we didn't read the fine print in bills. No, this is the.
Back to the
Why did I have myself? I'm sorry. Another thing is I believe people have rights in other ways too. When I encourage my people to go into a bar, who wants to be a bar person? Come on up. You rose your hand too quickly.
It's scary in an old lady, isn't it?
I think you've had too much to drink. Put my official hat on. You have a seat in the bar. You're drinking. What I would have my people do is when they did bar checks or go into a bar, my hat straight? Okay. When they go into a bar, what I do is have them, if they look like they had too much drink, to approach them and say something like, "Ma'am, it appears that you might have had too much to drink. If you don't have a designated driver," and I also tell my police officers not to smile and laugh, too. But if you've had too much to drink, if you do not have a designated driver, I will try to arrange one. I'll call you a cab, I'll call you somebody, or make sure somebody here is going to, that has not been drinking, will take you or have a family member come pick you up. But rest assured that if I catch you on the road and I test you and you are intoxicated, I will arrest you. And so what I want to do is, I want to have people, I want I almost said subjects, but they're not subjects. The people of my community, my brothers and sisters out there, I want to help them comply with the laws. I don't want to sit there and set them up and, oh, you broke the law, so now I'm going to get you, like a traffic citation just because they're 5 mile an hour speed limit, just to get stats. I want to have people comply with the laws. And if they don't, still use my discretion whether or not to arrest them. So with that philosophy in mind, too, even though she's drunk, anyway, even though she's drunk, then I would instruct my people, when you leave there, don't specifically set out and wait for her. Do not set up behind a billboard or sit in the end of the parking lot waiting for her to leave. You know, try to give her a chance to comply fairly, and if she doesn't comply, then arrest her, but don't set her up and don't, set up a trap for her. So.
That's really nice. Oh, thank you. Bless you.
You got somebody driving you?
I set up a pot in a bar.
My son is driving me. Trying to not.
So what I would do is I would tell my people to encourage compliance for safety's sake and not in traffic. How many are familiar with texting while driving? Yeah. Honk if you love, this ought to be put on all the cell phones. Honk if you love Jesus. text while driving if you want to meet him. Tell you a little story I had to do with the legislature on this. Was it 2 years ago, Lori? 3 years ago? About 3 years ago, when they were trying to implement the law, I was sheriff and I was scrutinizing a lot of the laws that were coming out of the legislature. Well, one of them was the texting while driving. Now, the intent's great. We need to keep people from texting while driving. We need to keep people from reading newspaper, putting on makeup, changing their clothes, slapping the kids or whatever while driving because it causes accidents. But there's already laws that cover that. So the legislature had the bill came out, and I got a hold of it, and it said that no excuses, texting while driving, blah, blah, blah. It was more complicated than that, but basically what I pointed out to the legislature then was, wait a minute, you can't pass this because police officers text all the time. We've got computers in the car. It's not just a radio where you get on there in car 54, where are you? We've got radios, we have to answer calls. 90%, and Eaton County anyway, 90% of it goes over the computer and they have to respond and stuff so it don't go into the scanner land. So it's all on computer. So they have to text while they're driving. Well, if they get in an accident because they're doing that, they get reprimanded for it. So they have to do it safely. So the thing is I told the legislators, police officers do it all the time. And basically their answer to me was, well, thanks for letting us know, we'll exempt police officers. So my answer to them again was, wait a minute, time out. I'm not going to have my deputies enforce a law that we're exempt from. Well, we're going to pass it anyway, because there's a lot of agencies out there that want this. Okay? Well, against my wishes and my encouragement, they passed it anyway. And hopefully it's saving some lives, but the whole thing is I called them back up, and again, I didn't necessarily talk to any specific legislator. I talked to, a lot of the legislators won't talk to me, they have their staffers talk to me. So, and I've talked to many, many staffers, so I'm not sure which one it was, but basically it's one that I talked to before, because he says, what now, Sheriff? I says, well, under Michigan law, it's a civil infraction. And in a civil infraction, we cannot collect evidence or subpoena records. In other words, if I stop you for texting while driving, I cannot take your cell phone, unless you voluntarily give it to me, and find out if you were texting. And I cannot get a hold of Nextel, Verizon, or whatever cell to find out if you were texting there. So it's totally unenforceable. And then actually, won't tell you who, but have been threatened. You can't tell people that. Well, every chance I get, I tell people. It's totally unenforceable. And the first time you get caught, I believe it's a $100 fine, and the second time you get caught with it, it's a $200 fine. But in my opinion, you develop your own opinion, but the only reason that law is passed, because it is unenforceable, is to be a revenue source for the police agency that's writing the ticket. So I feel that's unconstitutional, and what I did is put a memo out to all my people, not telling them they couldn't do it, because I was training them to be discretionary law enforcement. I put it very bluntly. If you write for texting while driving, I want to personally hear about it, and you better have a good reason. And while I was still sheriff, nobody, unless they did it without me knowing it, but nobody wrote any tickets for texting while driving. They might have stopped for it, which is good, because, hey, you're not going to do that, because you're there to teach them that they shouldn't be doing things that distract them. Compliance with the law, not to trick them into, or write a ticket and then have it where, it's not enforceable, but they write a ticket anyway just to get the money out of Another little thing. Being constitutional sheriff and discretionary, you've always got to do the right thing. And over the years, the police, because they've been non-discretionary and a strong arm of the government, they've lost respect of the people. One of the biggest things that a sheriff or law enforcement should do is to make sure that the rights of the people go across the board, and they police their own. How many people in here have ever heard of things where the police might be trying to cover up for somebody, in the department because they've been doing something, or distrust the police because of that? Well, we had a situation, and again, because I honored my oath of office, not because I'm some great guy, but I tried to do the right thing and build the respect of the people, and I did not want anybody to destroy that respect, or even my own people. We had a deputy that was exemplary deputy. He was going out, and I hate meth labs. I hate the people that, I don't hate the people, but I think the people that run meth labs are dirtbags. And we had some meth labs, and we would do a sweep every so often and clear them out of our county, and then they'd come back. We had a deputy that was like a bird dog on meth labs. He was getting an average of 1.5 every month in my county. He was getting awards. He was a great deputy. The thing is, and he's, I believe, a 15-year veteran. He got a little overzealous. Found out that there was a couple search warrants he did on the last 2 meth labs that he was disingenuous on.
He didn't have just cause.
He didn't have just cause, and made some statements in there that weren't totally true, which got us access to do the search warrant. Now, they did have meth labs. That was all good, but the prosecutor's office even threw him out because of that. My response to that is I fired him, because we have to protect the rights. We have to protect the integrity of the sheriff's office, and we have to protect the rights of all the people, even the dirtbags, or we're going to lose the respect of the people. And it even goes further than that, because what had happened is I fired him. The commissioners and the union got a state arbitrator to come in and said I had to hire him back. And we went through all that rigmarole, and they're going to force me to hire him back. Okay. And they asked me, well, when's he going to start working the road? I said, he's not. Well, you got to hire him back. I said, he can't work the road without being deputized. There's no court in this country can force me, because I'm a sheriff, to put him back on the road and violate the rights of my citizens. So I hired him back, but put him back in corrections where he could not harm anybody, because they forced me to do that. But again, if he would have been working for another department or a sheriff that is not a constitutional sheriff, they probably would have complied and put him back on the road to violate your rights. So again, that's what I'm trying to do, is get people to understand what a constitutional sheriff is, the importance of your sheriff, and for people to realize that the most important election you can ever do in your life is the sheriff. And it pays to get a hold of your sheriff and talk to him or her and make sure that your sheriff is leaning towards being a constitutional sheriff and discretionary law enforcement. If they aren't, try to coax them into it. Okay. Yeah, I've been talking so much that I lost my spot. That's Lamb. Oh, about liberty and freedom. What's the name of your group?
Liberty.
You ever think what liberty means?
Unalienable rights.
Yes. And well, I did a little thinking about it too, and liberty and freedom aren't the same thing, but they're inseparable. And the way I look at it, and the way I try to explain it is liberty is a state of a free person. It's a state of a free person. But you cannot have liberty without freedom. You cannot have freedom without liberty. Because freedom alone, like the tape we saw, is anarchy. Liberty is based on morality. Where does morality come from? God. If we are to have freedom, freedom needs liberty, and liberty needs God. Freedom and liberty need God and the constitutional rule of law in order for us to be truly free. So it's a beautiful name that you got. I took an unwavering oath to protect these rights as sheriff. And we all have the duty to ensure that all of our elected officials live by their oath of office. The oath of office is not just a photo op or just a thing where you just go up there and hey, I'm a sheriff now, or I'm a legislator now. It's an oath. It's an oath to the people and an oath to God. And we have to all hold our elected officials that take an oath accountable to that oath. And hopefully they understand what the oath is and what it represents in the Constitution. The intensity with which you individually support and defend the Constitution sets the course for our freedom and liberty of future generations. What can we do? Learn about what's happening. Get with your sheriff. Guide your sheriff into understanding what the Constitution is, and the Constitution is for everybody's rights. Find out what the legislators are doing. Let your voice be heard. Stand up. Get the answers you deserve. Help educate others, including our children. Don't give the media a free pass. And be sure to thank those elected officials when they do what's right, but hold them accountable when they don't. Don't interfere with anything in the Constitution that must be maintained, for it's the only safeguard of our liberties.
And he violated them.
Yeah.
Ironic.
I found out that in my research too, but it was a good statement. So I think that's it. Stuff, or how you want to do this?
We're doing really good. You would like to take some questions or discuss any other issues related to this topic?
Sure.
Yeah. One thing I've always wondered about is what is the authority of the sheriff in relation to city police within city limits? Does the sheriff have co-equal authority with city police?
Well, basically, but what it is, it's like a peaceful coexistence. Maybe that's not the right term, but the sheriff is the ultimate law enforcement of that county. And no one usurps the sheriff's authority. But we have enough to do, and we're not playing a game of, we're going to jump that call because we want the publicity. We have to just, and I had 8 jurisdictions within my county when I was sheriff. And you work very well, we work very well with most of them, but what they do is we had like the city of Grand Ledge, city of Potterville, Eaton Rapids, Olivet, and what they did is they had their own police force. And we were always there to support them and help them out, but we didn't encroach because they were getting paid by the city people to enforce their laws. And that is a subdivision of local government And I don't want to be like the federal government or the state government and encroach on them and enforce my rules on them. If they asked for my help, I would come in and help them, or and it worked vice versa. If they come out and help us, and we need backup too. But it was a good relationship that we had. For instance, I don't know if you heard, 2001, there was a train derailment in Potterville. There were 2,400 people evacuated because there were, I believe, 7 train cars with liquid propane on them that if they levied it would take out the whole town. One of them levied. We had the Potterville, it was Potterville's, but they only had the chief and 2 people. So they asked us to come in and help on that, and then they tried to skirt it out. They said, no, no, no. This is your deal. We will assist you. Really, the chief wanted to go play golf. That's when I was undersheriff, and the sheriff and I would not let him do that.
He's going to come back for last rites.
Yeah. So we said, no, we'll use all our resources to assist you, but anytime we go up in front of the public or the news media, you and the city council are right there with us because this is your baby. We're not going to usurp your authority. It's your authority, and we won't do anything unless you let us do it. So it works both ways, but we did not want to go in and take over. So what we do is, and we expect that other agencies will not do that to us or anything else either. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. Well, I would like to ask a follow-up. Is there ever a situation where if city police are violating your rights in some way that you can appeal to the sheriff to assist you in defending against that?
Not in court, but I've had, there was that, not the same chief, but the chief they got at, Potterville's had some trouble getting chiefs. So hopefully they're all squared away now, but they had another chief that was going out there and going around town and writing tickets, and we intervened a couple times by getting hold of the city council and saying, probably shouldn't do that, because people are going to, our advice to people would be to take the city to court. But we didn't directly intervene and try to stop it. If they were making an arrest, my deputies, if they were making an unlawful arrest, we've had situations where if they didn't stop them out on the road, if they weren't there, in the jail, if they brought somebody in and they didn't have a good arrest, they wouldn't accept them. So the sheriff was acting as a check and balance for the other agencies too. Yes.
Sheriff, excuse me just a moment. I'm going to pass this around and remind people that this is going to help offset the sheriff's travel costs and cost of the advertisers. Thank you so much.
Years ago, I was driving through the village of Lake Orion. I live in Orion Township. And we used to have a festival with the rides and everything for the kids right there in the village. Well, right there out near the main drag of M24, Lapeer Road, was to the side our sheriff's department with their armored vehicle. And our
Armored
sheriff's,
vehicle?
yes, armored vehicle.
You're a terrorist.
Oh, God, yeah. And they were dressed in camouflage, well, I guess with the black and white urban camouflage.
Yep.
And they had some prisoners out there dressed in military camouflage. Well, I did a turn around and went and parked and walked up to them, and I said, what's going on here? All 5 feet of me. And and what's the problem, ma'am? I says, why are you dressed like this? Why aren't you dressed like regular sheriff's deputy? Do you think you are a military jurisdictional task force or a quasi-military jurisdiction? Well, in a sense we are, because, no, wait a minute, no, you're not. You took an oath to be the constitutional sheriff department, not a multi-jurisdictional task force department. And they all looked at me like this woman's cockeyed and she must be from Waco or whatever. So I just want to know what your opinion is on that.
Well, my opinion is that's happening all over the country. What we've evolved into is getting away from the traditional, or the, what I believe is the founder's intent for policing, or law enforcement as commonly called today. And that was, it should be patterned after the sheriff. Because they had the sheriff in mind when they were doing that. And even legislators don't realize it. And again, there's some things that going on. Should I tell about the financial emergency manager law? I'll do it.
Hey, Sheriff, I'm sorry. Why don't we, I hate interrupting you, but this is great information. Chris had an important topic he wanted to ask you about, and now that the food's up, we want to get it while it's hot. So
Okay.
we're gonna, the sheriff will be here to talk to you.
Just remind me of the
afterward.
financial emergency
Yeah.
manager.
Okay.
We'll have time to mingle after we're done with our meeting as well. Chris, did you want to ask the sheriff?
It's probably related. Is that regarding the law that they want to put through in Michigan that weakens the sheriff's position?
No, that's a different one. Those are laws that are trying to take the gun boards away from the sheriff and give the authority to state police, taking away from the locals, like I was talking about, and give access to our records to the federal government also.
Hey, that's not lawful.
Well, I've got all the stuff, and if you want it, we don't have time to go into it here, but if somebody wants to talk to me about it later, or if you want to get some information on it and call me on it, I'd be glad to discuss it with you.
That's why the follow-up question would be, we need to get organized as a community to make it very articulately directed towards radio and the radio audience in this area, because that's a very serious.
Frank Beckman's program in our area would be a good one.
So we need to have a group of people behind it.
There are some bills that are being put out, and they're being candy-coated with things like maybe getting guns in the schools and stuff, and getting rid of the what do you call it?
Gun boards?
The permit to purchase, and to make it easier for people to get concealed weapons. But in my town, we never had any trouble with people getting concealed weapons. So I don't know what the intent is, and again, nobody's ever been contacted that actually do the work that I know of that can instruct them on how to make this law. And there's no need for it. But anyway, we knocked it down 2 years ago, and it keeps coming back and readdressed and changed, and they're really trying to push this through, which makes me very suspicious. But I've got paperwork on it. You can read it, and if you have any questions, we can talk about that later. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much.